One of our goals in discussing forest soils is to better understand water and nutrient limitation. Soils are the main reservoirs of both of those limiting resources for forests. However, we are trying to study forests, so we want to link this back to everything else that is going on in these systems, not just those that are below ground. And the science for doing this is called ecosystem ecology, one that links below and above ground processes. So, ecosystems. Recall where this fits in our hierarchy of spatial structure or spatial organization in ecology. We're talking about fairly complex systems, groups of communities, relatively, like I say, complex, but not necessarily as big as individual landscapes. One of the things that really kind of distinguishes the ecosystem scale is the importance and effect of neighboring communities exchanging information or energy or resources. Plants and animals migrate, they move, and other kinds of materials can end up in ecosystems that affect how they work. Okay, so a little bit of history about ecosystem ecology. This was an idea that emerged in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, especially because of the work by Eugene Odum. The detonation of multiple nuclear bombs above ground between 1945 and 1960 or so increased the amount of radioactive carbon in the atmosphere. Now, that carbon is relatively easy to trace through living systems, and because of that, we've learned that energy and nutrients move across boundaries and between ecosystems. We can also see that those materials are moving within different components of ecosystems, so that from the plants to the herbivores to the predators, and we can further see how what factors influence productivity. So I don't know that a lot of good has come from the nuclear bomb, but we have learned a lot about how ecosystems work from it. Now, one of the things about forests that we've learned through tracing of bomb carbon and other techniques is that they are seasonally dynamic. Now, there's nothing really that surprising about that. When it's spring, there's plenty of water, there's plenty of light, leaves are new, trees are productive. As the season goes on and trees start to senesce, their productivity decreases. Well, you can actually measure that that change in productivity in terms of the fluxes of atmospheric carbon dioxide. In the summer, CO2 gets depleted from the atmosphere, both the atmosphere underneath a forest stand as well as that of the atmosphere of the whole Earth. That fluctuates with those CO2 levels increasing in the winter because there is less biological uptake. And when one looks at the globe more broadly and over a long period of time, you can notice two things here. One is that within each particular year, there's a maximum and minimum of carbon dioxide. That's associated with forest dynamics. And there's also a general increase in CO2. That overall increase is associated with fossil fuel burning. Overall, they're steadily on the rise. We'll come back to that. So why does carbon cycling matter? Carbon sequestration, that's something that forests do, pull carbon out of the atmosphere and sequester it in a non-gaseous form, in a solid form, has value in terms of mitigating greenhouse gas accumulation. But it's not just that. Carbon sequestration is a portion of productivity. So all of the products that we care about, both in marine and in terrestrial systems, are controlled in part by carbon dynamics. And carbon dynamics are oftentimes related directly to yield. So whether it's coffee, or bananas, or potatoes, or some other agricultural product, carbon cycling matters. It matters in our forests, of course, as well, because it is, like I say, carbon sequestration is a portion of productivity, so producing timber is dependent on it. Mitigating greenhouse gas emissions is also in part dependent on this process of carbon sequestration, pulling it out of the atmosphere. It's productivity. And one of the problems that we face in the western US is this increase in tree mortality at broad spatial scales over the past 2 decades or so, much of which is associated with fire and insect and disease outbreak. This is a problem for us. It is reducing productivity of our forests overall. Okay, I want to make one point. I realize a little bit of a non sequitur, but global patterns of carbon uptake are reversed in the northern hemisphere versus the southern hemisphere. This is because summer occurs at different times of year. The highest rates of carbon sequestration in the southern hemisphere actually occur in December and January because that's when summer is. It's reversed in the northern hemisphere because we have summer in July. The northern hemisphere forests dominate the interannual carbon fluxes because there's so much more forest in the northern hemisphere. Here is just a map of overall terrestrial productivity. Like I say, the northern hemisphere has extensive areas of land across Eurasia and North America. Even though forest productivity decreases as one goes from the equator to the poles, there's just so much forest up in the northern high latitudes that it dominates this interannual productivity or carbon sequestration, global carbon dynamics. So of course, when you look at a complex map like this, it's washing over many things that are important in controlling forest productivity. Precipitation is critical, temperature is critical. That's in part why productivity decreases as one goes from the equator to the poles, and soil quality is also playing an important role here as well. Now, this is just one kind of bigger point to acknowledge here. Stepping aside from our lens of forest ecology solely, we have a problem that productivity in natural ecosystems is not necessarily spatially perfectly associated with human consumption of those resources.